Are we ready to get started? Yes. Okay. So there, we were kind of strategizing just before we started, and our canary in the coal mine requested that we start by simply reviewing what happened in Act 1, because as he described it, I'm just going to call you out here. He thinks he knows what happened, but he wants to be sure. I guess I didn't name any names, but if you were here last.
We all
It's
know.
me.
Okay, it's Joseph. So I happen to organize my notes in terms of the scenes, so I can try to offer a brief summary of what I saw as happening, but everybody else, please chime in and contribute. And then Mr. Seeley has some questions that it's a different approach to discussing this act rather than just going through the scenes in order, some broader questions about what we just experienced. So the end of Act 1, Scene 1 is the banishment of Cordelia. Lear asks Burgundy and France, well, first Burgundy, do you want to take her under these conditions that she comes with no dowry? He basically says, that leaves me no choice, of course, I don't want to. And then France comes in and says she is a dowry herself and criticizes him for saying that. So France.
I was telling Lisa before that my new favorite line is that my love should kindle to inflamed respect. He now respects her in an inflamed way. Given what that's.
And most rich being poor, most choice forsaken, and most loved despised. So any questions about that part, Joseph? Or was that part, could you follow what was happening there?
Yeah, that's the same as my summary.
And then Cordelia leaves asking that she's remarkably respectful of her sisters, I think, and says that she hopes they will care for him as he ought to be cared for. And Goneril and Regan, as soon as she leaves, start discussing how full of changes his age is, and that even in the best of times he was rash, and now it's gotten worse. So you can see already that they don't regard him as somebody who can manage himself. They're treating him disrespectfully and with suspicion, right?
One of the questions I had about that scene is, are they nervous about their own position? Like, if he could make such a shift in perspective on his favorite, are they now also, because they talked at some point about, maybe making a plan or taking action. So I was curious if they're also now worried, if he can lose favor, or if she can lose, the favorite can lose favor so quickly, are they in trouble? Do they have to tread carefully?
I think that's right. At least they're going to have to deal with it.
Okay.
And not only with Cordelia, but also Regan says Kent's banishment. He just banished his two of his closest people at a whim. So they've got to look for more of that.
So also, scene 2. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, that's fine.
Scene 2 is Edmund's plot. We speculated about Edmund on the basis of those opening lines. Well, it doesn't keep his character concealed very long. So here we see that his plot against his father and brother, and his almost, well, we're going to discuss the characters later, but you got the plot basically, Joseph, that he has forged a letter from his brother saying that he can't be trusted to take care of himself any longer, that the young people should take responsibility for him in his old age and seize control. And then Edmund is playing the role of the innocent and the protector of both of them under this scenario, his brother from his father's rage, his father from whatever motivated this on the part of his brother, but really he's orchestrating the whole thing. Did I get that? Does that sound accurate? Yeah, okay.
Questions about that part? No? Good, okay.
Yeah, I love the line, let me, if not by birth, have lands by wit.
Mm-hmm. Scene 3, Goneril complaining bitterly of the behavior of Lear and his men, saying they're like, her father's like a child who has to be kept in check, and the men, his knights, are committing one gross crime or another hourly. So she just is planning to make him dismiss half of his men and reprimanding him for their behavior.
And let me add that she's encouraging her servants to treat the king and his men with disrespect so as to provoke a fight. She wants to provoke a fight, so she'll have reason to dismiss the knights and treat them that way.
So that's why one of them, when Lear says something like, do you know who I am? And he says, my lady's father. I assume that was supposed to be a disparaging way of putting who he is, nothing more than his lady's father. All right, and scene 4, Kent returns to serve the king in disguise, takes his part in this situation. Lear, after being subject to Goneril's reprimands and orders to reduce the numbers, decides to go live with Regan instead, because she surely will not do the same thing, and has a moment of reflection that maybe Cordelia's sin was not so great in the face of all of this. And one of the things I'm interested to talk about is Albany's behavior in this scene, what exactly his position is here. And then, well, scene 5 is mostly the fool and the advice of the fool, so I don't exactly know how to summarize that. We'll have to see what we can gather about his lines. But that's a very bird's eye view of what happened. But does that satisfy Joseph, or were there more specific things that you felt like you weren't quite sure of?
No, I felt that gives me more confidence, because I was in that territory already. So there was some of the language I wasn't quite sure on. So it's good to kind of make sure I'm on the right track. Okay. But I'm loving the drama so far and the character development. Edmund in particular, the resentment he has about the system he's born into, and his, that little opening part of his speech where he doesn't think that these customs of being a bastard should get in the way of what's rightfully his. It's just great.
Not only that, actually, he goes further and he says that actually this is the people who are born legitimate is kind of boring. He says, who in the less lusty stealth of nature take more composition, and this is line 12, scene 2, line 12, more composition and fear quality than doth within a dull, stale, tired bed. So he refers to those who are born legitimate, have come from a dull, stale, tired bed, and go to the creating a whole tribe of fops, got between asleep and awake. Like the couple are almost half asleep when in this dull, stale bed, while the bastards are born out of passion, out of lust, and so they have, they are better, they have greater what does he say? Composition and something.
Fierce quality.
Composition and fierce quality. So this is such an amazing original thought that the people who are born out of wedlock, who are born out of passion or lust, are actually in a way more, it sort of makes sense when you pause and think about it, but never ever have I heard this idea anywhere.
Well, it struck me as broader and more vicious than that, because he says, "Thou nature art my goddess, to thy law my services are bound. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom?" So I took that to mean more than just that he didn't think that these laws regarding legitimacy, inheritance for legitimate versus illegitimate, but just rebellion against custom and societal convention altogether, and just swearing allegiance to nature.
What makes sense, yeah. There's a phrase here that I didn't understand, and I had to look it up. In line 19, he says, as to the legitimate, fine word, quote, legitimate. So he does what we in modern times do so often, the legitimate. Well, my legitimate. And so I was like, what does he mean? And I looked it up. If I could read to you one sentence, the meaning. It says late Middle English, the word legitimate means in the sense born of parents lawfully married to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't at first reading, I thought legitimate, he just meaning legitimate the way we know it in English, but there's a deeper meaning that the etymology of the word legitimate is born appropriately in wedlock. So
yeah, and we contrasted that last time with the opening, on the opening page. Gloucester talked about, I have a son by order of law.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't use he could have used the legitimate word, he didn't. He uses the by order of law.
Okay.
And then often people refer to somebody like Edmund as illegitimate,
Mm-hmm.
outside of the order of law. I mean, it's really striking. I mean, we have, I guess, a variety of ages here, but certainly for those in my age realm, we're not that far removed from when to be a bastard was a big societal problem, even in our countries, right? So in maybe other countries it still is, but I mean, when I was young and growing up, that's when people were starting to say that legitimacy doesn't matter. What does it mean to be a bastard? That was being lost as a problem, as a sense of problem in the 70s and 80s, I think. And now we don't even think about it. But
when I was a little kid,
my parents' generation did. They thought about it a lot. And that made it so that if a woman is pregnant out of wedlock, then they really an intense pressure to give that child up for adoption so that the child will be legitimized.
Mm. So in that last line, when he says fine word legitimate, well, my legitimate means Edgar, his brother.
Yeah.
Because then the letters, yes.
But I'm sorry to repeat, but like it doesn't mean I'm interpreting it that it doesn't mean legitimate the way we know the word legitimate, meaning lawful. Because there's a pun on the word legitimate based on its origin, because legitimate means lawful, but it also means born within wedlock.
Mm-hmm.
Hence the significance. Fine word legitimate. Why does he say anyway? I think so.
I thought that word legitimate, when you're referring to people, always meant born in wedlock.
I think that's the confusion here, is that is how I interpreted it too.
Yeah.
I think because we usually hear it in the context of illegitimate child, and maybe I mean it's
that's a legitimate point you are making.
Yeah.
But we use the word legitimate to mean not only legitimate versus illegitimate child, but we use it more broadly to mean anything that's lawful. And okay, I guess we are in agreement that here he means it in a more narrow sense. Yeah.
Okay. And it also sometimes just means okay, all right. That's a legitimate point. We use it almost as a synonym for good, valid, or correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know you had some questions, Andrew, on how you wanted to proceed with the conversation. Do you want to?
We can talk more about Edmund. Let's see. I have a number of questions. Do you want? I guess let's go back and we'll come back to this again. But just Cordelia. so we didn't get a chance to talk about Cordelia in the light of things that we read in the or we had read, or we're going to read in the end of the scene, which you've now read.
Mhm.
What do we think of Cordelia? What do we think of Cordelia taking into account that whole scene? And I guess one way to put it is in the words of France when he says, God's gods is at 294. 'Tis strange that from their cold's neglect my love should kindle to inflame respect. Do we think Cordelia, what we see of Cordelia is the kind of thing that would lead us to admire her tremendously, the way that France is saying it?
Yeah, I think so. I think she seems to see things for what they are. One of the lines I wrote down that I really liked, kind of as she's taking her leave after France chooses her, she says, okay, well, to her sisters, you know, she one of the lines she says was, the jewels of our father with washed eyes. So now you are the jewels. And, you know, I hope you take care of him. But you kind of sees that she knows who they are and what their character is like and what they're doing. They're just flattering him for the sake of what they're going to receive out of it. So I really like how she and the earlier context we have that we discussed last time, where she kind of says to herself she doesn't want to participate in that farce.
Well, I mentioned that I admired her for not being more vicious with her sisters. I mean, she says your faults, let's see, this is around 314. I know what you are, and like a sister, I'm most loath to call your faults as they are named. So she's reluctant. I know who you are, but I'm reluctant even to say, as your sister, I'm reluctant to say it. Love well our father, to your professed bosoms I commit him. You've professed that you're going to take good care of him. I'm going to entrust him to you. And the only thing she says is, but yet alas, stood I within his grace, I would prefer him to a better place. So I'd rather he were with me. I have more confidence that I will do right by him, but it's so tempered and gentle and could be so much more aggressive given what they've done. And then Goneril, a few lines later, says, let your study be to content your Lord who hath received you at fortune's alms. You have obedience scanted and well are worth the want that you have wanted. So she's the one entirely in the wrong, and she's being spiteful and critical while Cordelia is holding back and it just seems like her concern is her father's welfare. And that's what dominates here under all conditions, whether she's interacting with him or whether she's interacting with her sisters. Honest concern for his welfare and honest concern with being truthful.
I kind of wish I knew what made Lear so great when he was younger. Like what
I was just wondering that.
Because he has to have done something or done a lot of things that made him worthy of a good woman and good daughter of Cordelia to be so loyal to him.
And Kent, why is Kent wanting to still serve him? Right? You've got those two threads of these two people that are devoted to him. And he's obviously, we're seeing him only now when he's starting to lose it. But is there, that was going to be my question, is there any indication so far of what might have, that I've missed that might have earned our admiration for him or earned Kenton?
I thought one thing that's interesting, at least with the question of why Cordelia is so loyal to him, is that, I mean, what she says when he asks her to proclaim his love for him is, I love you according to my duty. And so I think part of it is just she's his daughter. And so whether he's good or not, it's her duty to take care of him as her father, and especially in his old age. And so I think, yeah, he might have been a great man, but in some sense, I wonder if her action should have been any different if he had never been a great man, if he had just been kind of average and then descended into some like semi-madness. I think as his daughter, she still has to take care of him in the way that she is.
That is
Part of the reason why it matters to me is because because Lisa, you're saying why Cordelia is so great. And when you were explaining, you giving your case, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm convinced of Cordelia's more value in her than I originally perceived. But I think the reason why I didn't perceive that value that you're talking about just now is because I can't tell if it's really warranted or if it's just that old view of duty that, yeah, you know, your dad could be good, average, or maybe even a scoundrel, but you still kind of gotta do the right thing and do your duty and love him. So
that's why I'm saying I don't like that makes it warranted. Like, it's, I guess, in situations of family ties, there's virtue that can make your care for someone warranted, or there's just the tie itself. And I'm not saying he definitely never was a great man, but even in this situation, like, do you look at how Goneril and what's the other one?
Regan.
Like, do you look at how they're treating him and go, well, yeah, that's justified, he's crazy? Or do you look at that and say, yeah, that's not the right way to do this, even if he is crazy, because he's their father and they have some duty to keep him safe, even from himself, like Kent and Cordelia are trying to do. But I get what you're saying, he might have been a great man, especially when we consider Kent being so devoted to him.
Let me bring up a couple lines and see what we think of them. So 105 in that first scene. How's my audio doing, Lisa?
Great.
Okay. Good my lord. So she explains what she means, or she at least elaborates on, I love your majesty according to my bond, no more, no less. Good my lord, you have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return those duties back as are right fit. Obey you, love you, and most honor you. So how do we take that? And then I want to also bring in something that struck me this reading it last week was at 156. Kent, when he starts, he says, Royal Lear, whom I have ever honored as my king, loved as my father, as my master followed. It said, so Kent says, I've loved you as a father. So do we see Kent and Cordelia to kind of, do they shed light on each other in the way they're talking about their feelings and orientation towards Lear?
They're soul siblings.
Yeah.
If they both see him as this great father, then they might not be blood siblings, but they're soul siblings.
I think
And they both say that they love him or loved him. So it's, his behavior may have been rash, but there was something within him that warranted, it's not just duty. There was both proclaim a strong feeling of love for him. So we don't know what that is, but it seems like it's important that they had that feeling about him.
Molly?
Yeah, I'm noticing a connection with Antigone, where she has a duty to bury her brother, whether he was in the right or in the wrong, whether she loved him better than Eteocles, or whether one was a favorite, it didn't matter. They both deserve equal loyalty from her. And I think there's somewhat the same thing going on here, where Kent is committed to the king, and that's like a permanent relationship that you don't just throw over if he goes a little senile. And Cordelia has the same relationship. It's lifelong. She owes him the debt of her life, and it doesn't matter if he's a good king. It's irrelevant.
But do we get the impression that, was he a good father?
It kind of doesn't matter. I think that might be why she's hesitating to speak. She's not able to honestly be effusive about, oh, he's such a great dad and he loves me so much and he's been such a great king. And she doesn't have a lot to say about how great he is. And so by that omission, we can guess that maybe he's just an average king and an average father, but she still owes him that duty of honor and respect.
Yeah.
And
So
that's
I'm getting a different sense, which I want to mention in a moment, but Ian's has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, does everybody think it's completely out of the question that Cordelia is also being calculated? I mean, this is being presented to us as like an old tale where there's two nefarious daughters and one that's wise and true. But I just wondered if Cordelia, having heard what Goneril had to say, and then Regan trying to one up each other in their, you know, sweet words to their father, she thought, I'm just not going to play that game. It's much smarter for me to, you know, not pretend, that's the wrong word, but I'm just going to play it. I'm going to play it a bit lower. And does nobody have this smallest reservation in their head that she might be also calculating?
I think the asides that she has before she speaks don't seem to indicate that.
Luke
What-
says,
what
I
shall
cannot
Cordelia
heave
speak?
my heart into my mouth.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And love and be silent. She doesn't say scheme and be silent. Love and be silent. So no, I didn't suspect her of false motives at all.
Can I
Well,
say
what
something
did-
about, I wanted to say, just comment on the previous issue of like how, whether Lear was a good king and a good father, or like what kind of person he was, because the backstory kind of, Shakespeare has planted this problem in us that we will keep thinking about, like speculating on what the backstory is. If we are to believe Goneril, which is not the best source, but she does comment that even like in his best times, he was rash. He was an unruly person and a rough person, hot-headed. She says, this is lines 341 onwards. The best and soundest of his time had been but rash.
And
Then must we look.
I want to temper, maybe not temper what I was saying, but clarify what I was saying, is that it's not that it doesn't matter at all how he treated them their whole lives. It's that it doesn't matter whether he was a great man. Like, he might have been an average man, but he performed the duties of the father well. At least that's what it seems like Cordelia is saying. And it seems like he acted as a father to Kent. And so it's in virtue of that. Like, if he were their father and he had left when they were young and then come back at this point and had never raised them or helped them or done what a father should do, I don't think they would have the same duty to him that they do now. But because he performed those duties and performed them well, now they do have that obligation to him.
And I also just kind of got the sense that Cordelia doesn't want to just play the game, right? She did, like, whether or not, to your point, whether or not he's a good man or not, does she really want to get this land just by flattering him? You know, even if it's false flattery, right? Even if he doesn't earn the love, which might seem like it's more justified to lie to him, does she want to do that? Which I don't get the sense she wants to. But there is some love that she feels towards him and Kent feels towards him. So there's something there. And one clarifying question, in Goneril's and Reagan's conversation, were they saying though that he did change? Like, so
Yeah.
Raj's point that you know, he was rash at some points, but even they're noticing something's different with him lately that they have to be. So there even is some indication that he wasn't always like this.
Well, Goneril says we must look from his age to receive not alone the imperfections of long engraft condition. So, but infirm and choleric years increase them. So it was a tendency that was always in him, but that it's become more pronounced with age.
So me, I'm going to suggest this reading's just been coming to me over the last few weeks, so I don't know whether I'll hold it long, but I think that line at 101 makes it seem like she's kind of cold. I love your majesty according to my bond, no more, no less, which seems like that judge is doing it according to legal requirements, something like that. Yeah. But then she goes on to say, you have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return those duties back as our right fits. That certainly opens it up and humanizes the relationship she's talking about. Obey you, love you, and most honor you. But then this is what's on her mind, I think. At least this is what I'm thinking now. Why have my sisters husbands if they say they love you all? Happily, when I shall wed, that lord whose hand must take my plight shall carry half my love with him, half my care and duty. So I think I wonder if what's on her mind is, you want me to say I love you like a woman, like like I'm in love with you. You want everything from me. That's not how I love you. I love you as my father, not as my husband. He wants this kind of doting, and so what they had said Goneril and Regan, she's saying that's not really compatible with actually loving your husbands, which we have to look and see, do Goneril and Regan actually love their husbands or not, is maybe an important question. But that, anyway, I think that might be what's on her mind by saying, I love you as my father, not as my be all and end all and everything. Sorry, Molly.
And her fiancés are in the next room, and she has
The
to
men
kind
who are
of pay
courting her-
attention to that. They're
Yeah.
set already. They're married. They can say whatever they want and then explain to their husbands, "Oh, I didn't mean it." But if Cordelia says something really fawning to her father, and it gets back to France or Burgundy, she's not going to get married, and she'll be a spinster or have no power.
It's
So
also really interesting. I mean, maybe you women can speak to this, but what is it like for a young woman who is courting to have, having it's kind of growing out or beyond this loving relationship she has with her father, who is the man for her, and now she's looking to and starting to open her heart out to another man who's going to take something of that, or is it like that? I don't know, but I think that's what Shakespeare's seeing. Cordelia's struggling with that on a natural level, and then she's got this whole ceremony on top of it. Makes it difficult.
It seems like it's just both of those things integrated together, that she is appalled by the falseness of the flattery, because it is false. And you even see, I forget which one went first, I guess it was probably Goneril, Regan say, well, I need to do better than her. I mean, you see how explicitly calculating it is. So she's both refusing to participate in the empty flattery for gain, and also saying part of the nature of that empty flattery is that you're using language that's so exaggerated that you're not allowing for love for your husband. You're just kind of obliterating that as a possibility, because your whole heart is supposed to be devoted to your father. And the connection, come on, I've got a bunch of Les Miserables readers here. Jean Valjean has a moment where he's looking at Cosette and he's thinking he wants to be all to her. He never wants her to fall in love because he wants to be the whole of her universe. And he's never had it. It's a difficult thing to talk about because it ends up sounding perverse if you're not careful, but it's so beautiful in the novel that he's aware that he's trying to kind of use her to fulfill all roles of love in his life, and how wrong that is. So yeah, I see that as part of what she regards as the falseness of their declarations.
Molly?
yeah, and I think she's also proud of her honesty and proud that she's not like her sisters. And she says explicitly, I am glad I have not those qualities that they have, the ability to just say these facile flatteries.
Wait, did she say that?
She says that in line 267, even for want of that, for which I am richer. So she's virtuous because she doesn't have these qualities, a still soliciting eye and such a tongue. So their tongues and their eyes are flattering the father, and she doesn't have that eye and tongue, and is glad that she thinks that makes her virtuous, and France agrees.
Sarah?
I had a question, kind of taking a step back from the play itself, to ask about how the audience might have responded to some of the descriptions of what consists of a proper relationship. So there's like the relationship between the servant and the king, the relationship between a daughter and a father, the relationship between a bastard son and a legitimate son and a father. And I'm curious, like, in all of these cases, when we're talking about like the characters are saying that the relationship should be a certain way, or flouting, in the case of Edmund, flouting what the relationship should be, would audiences have had like an immediate visceral reaction, like that's wrong, or would they have been sympathetic to the questioning of some of the what's proper.
I read somewhere that a commentator wrote that in that culture, or like in the theater, it was kind of understood that if there's somebody's a bastard, then you can just assume that he's a bad guy and he has all kinds of evil properties. It just went as a package deal.
I think that at least the audience was in a different situation than us in that these relationships were very living and real. The king and his subjects, the lord and his vassals, and that they had these relationships plus father-child relationships. So at least they wouldn't have found any of this strange. And I think it's probably right that there'd be a cultural expectation that a bastard is going to be bad. As we bad news. But it is also striking at the same time that the very first thing we see of the whole play is Gloucester saying, you know, he's really way beyond what you'd think a bastard would be.
Yeah.
And I'm going to bring him here because I'm proud of him. So it's I think that probably the audience would have found that surprising, just like it is in the play, but then they're open to it because Gloucester, the way Gloucester is introducing him, I think.
Can
Yeah.
I go back quickly to Nick's question too about it? It feels to me like if we didn't trust that Cordelia ought to love Lear and that Kent's love of him was justified too, all of the power of this play would be taken out of it for me, at least the power of it as I've experienced it so far. And it isn't the nature of their love or on what their love is grounded isn't made clear, but you know, her parting words after she refuses to criticize her sister are, "Love well our father, to your professed bosoms I commit him." So it just seems like such earnest love and concern and care. So I feel like we're supposed to accept and believe without having experienced what their life was like prior to this scene, that we're supposed to believe that that love is warranted. And my mind is searching for characters who are rash and crazy and utterly lovable, and the people around them worship them. So I don't know if anyone can come up with one, but I really want to fill that in my mind, because that's how I do believe that Goneril is right. At least, I mean, I think she's exaggerating the point for her own purposes, but he probably was always rash. This probably is a continuation of a pattern that's gotten more extreme in age. That seems true to me, but it still seems like there's something about him that inspires the devoted love of Kent beyond duty, because it isn't just duty, it's expressed as love in the lengths he goes to protect and defend him already. You know, he comes back and risks, I don't know what, is he risking execution for coming back when he's been banished? That's quite a show of loyalty and devotion.
I thought also Regan's response to Cordelia saying that was really interesting, because she says, "Prescribe not us our duty." So it's like they know that it's their responsibility to take care of him, but then you see later that they kind of flout it anyways. But it's like there's this understanding that the children should be taking care of him, and when Cordelia kind of insinuates that she doesn't trust them to do that, they're like, "Don't tell me what, like, I know I need to do that. Don't tell me that." But then
they're going to be doing it according to their duty and not according to their hearts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas Cordelia would have, it seems like that we'd expect that it would be both for her.
And with Cordelia, they don't even keep up the pretense that they love him. And of course, we'll take care of him. We love him. They're not even playing that game anymore, because
I have to say that, you know, I think that the modern Western people in this call are looking at this from the modern Western context. And like in those times, and still in like India, where I come from, like it would be incomprehensible to a person like of my cultural heritage to understand that there is any kind of conflict between duty and love. Like we don't assess our parents. In my culture, they don't assess parents and like say, well, if he's a good guy, then I'm going to take care of him, and if he's not, it's just like not, it seems, this conversation seems strange to me, and I want to share that because I would assume that in those times that you love and honor and have duty to your king is not something that you say, well, if he's good, then I will, and if he's not, then I won't, or I will be in proportion to that.
I think that's probably right. I think that's the way in which we're modern and Western, whereas Shakespeare is at a period when modernity is developing, but it's right. There's this all living interaction between the traditional feudal arrangements and traditional feudal and Christian life and what is coming in modernity. And you see it live in Shakespeare.
I think the reason why it was important enough for me to bring it up is I do take it at face value that their love is earnest and a genuine value to Cordelia and Kent. But I think the reason why it was important enough for me to mention this is because if I didn't have the experience of how he was and why he was so lovable, I think it prevents me from feeling the meaning that Lisa, you clearly feel, and I want to feel. But
so that's very important that you I think it's important in a number of his plays that you get a look at the person as they were before the events of the play are happening from the way that other people talk about them. I think this is super important for Hamlet. You have to hear what Ophelia is saying about him and what other people, what the Claudius says about him, so that you can get a picture of what he was like before this terrible thing has changed him. And I think that's just very similar with Lear here, that I think it seems to me like the text we brought up show that he's at least he was a decent father. He's got his problems, but he's a decent father. He's in some ways a strong king, but also he had some problems that are starting to explode out in some ways. What we're seeing from him now is not completely crazy given the way he was before, but before it was under control. It was part of a whole life, and now he's losing control of those
And what just occurred to me is, so the two characters I'm liking the most so far are Kent and Cordelia. So it's interesting to see how they feel about their father, or how they see him versus the other ones. Because, okay, I respect their character, and so they admire him, even though we don't get specifics on what he was like. We get specifics about them and how they're talking about, or how they're conducting themselves. Kent's trying to be a voice of reason to calm him down. Cordelia's not wanting to play these politics games. So if they're wanting to call him father, their evaluation is almost like should be enough for us. Like, okay, I'm liking them, so I can at least take their statements, versus, we see the other characters and how they're behaving and can take their opinions for what they are too. So
I think you see it also, you see in Cordelia some, and especially in Kent, that they're so devoted to him that he's going to be mad at them.
Yeah.
They know he's going to erupt on them for what they're about to do, but they have to do it. I think with Cordelia, it's partly because of respect for him, partly because of respect for herself. And for Kent, it's just totally respect for him, and I guess concern for Cordelia. But he knows Lear is going to lash out at him. But he says, I have to stand up in your face because I love you so much, or I'm so devoted to you.
Yeah, so from that perspective, it almost, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but do we need to even know more about why they love him, right?
Well,
if we can respect them.
I did want to suggest too that for me personally reading this, there's something about almost not having experienced the source of their love that heightens the moral situation for me, because there's the difficulty of still showing him love, still doing the honorable thing under these circumstances when he is senile and when he is lashing out and being enraged. It kind of heightens their moral stature in my eyes, that they, even under those circumstances, are just treating him with complete loyalty and devotion. So there's lots to suggest that he, as he is right now, is not who he was. There are traces of it in his past, but it's not who he was. And then they're called upon, in the face of having that rashness and rage directed at them, still to love him and still to do right by him. And that's kind of the heart of what's happening to me.
Ian?
Yeah, I was just wondering, how old do we think these people are? I don't know if I saw it mentioned in this text, but reading the Lamb's summary, he referred to Lear being well over 80, which back in those days, you know, you probably had kids in your teens or 20s, which means that his daughters are in their 60s. And I feel like, you know, that kind of changes my perspective on the relationships.
That can't be.
If everyone's that old, like,
they're not getting married at 60.
That's right. It just seems a bit strange, doesn't it? Like, did he have? Is he like a Rod Stewart character? Had daughters, had children in his 60s himself? And I just wondered how that affected Cordelia's behavior towards everybody. Does she have a long experience of their scheming and conniving nature? And
Definitely get the feeling that Cordelia's significantly younger than the other two. So there, without any backstory, I could see that if Lear's in fact that old, that Cordelia could have been the child of a second wife or something like that, where
he says so.
He would have had her in his old age, kind of like Jacob has Joseph, and Benjamin. Joseph is his favorite, and he has him when he's quite old. Sorry, Raj?
Sorry, I was saying that it is true that he's a little over 80 because he's king. Lear says so later in the play, 4 scores and something. I forget exactly how many, but that is true that he's 80 years or just above 80 in age.
Let me, I want to move us to the rest of it. And I'm gonna point one thing out that we could follow up with and then ask another question, which will connect the Edmund and Lear parts. So this is on Act 1, Scene 2 at line 186, 187, after Edmund has talked to Edgar and Edgar leaves. A credulous father and a brother noble, whose nature is so far from doing harms that he suspects none, on whose foolish honesty my practices ride easy. We have two parallel stories going on here. At least so far, there's not an immediate relationship between Edmund, Edgar, Gloucester, and Lear, Cordelia, and the sisters. They're just two parallel stories. We're having, though, similar characters being introduced there, particularly Cordelia and Edgar. Cordelia and Edgar are both going to be unjustly persecuted, and it's going to kind of come out of nowhere for them, or at least, yeah, more for Edgar even. So how do they compare to one another? I wonder about Cordelia. Would Edmund say the same thing about her? Would he be able to practice upon her as easy as it seems like he's going to be able to practice upon Edgar and his father? So keep that in mind. We can talk about that if you want. But then let me raise another question, which comes from Edmund's opening line. He says, he says, "Thou nature art my goddess." And then Lear later on says something very similar. At least this is Act 1, Scene 4 at line 289. It's on page 59 in this edition. So line 289. "Hear nature, hear dear goddess, hear. Suspend thy purpose if thou didst intent to make this creature fruitful. Into her womb convey sterility. And then he goes on. What do we think about these characters in the light of they're saying, what does it mean to say nature's my goddess, or to call nature a goddess? And what do we think about that in light of their character and what we're seeing in the play?
Well, it's a pagan. These are pagan people, right? He calls upon Jupiter and Jove, and Jove is which is the same, and refers to the gods in the plural. So I guess they worship nature and nature's gods. That's like a starting point. What the implications are, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
So,
definitely in the case, definitely in the case of Lear's speech, I thought he was just imploring to the gods to, you know, make his child barren. But sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just saying the while in that paragraph is like the best in the whole, best lines of entire Act 1. The viciousness with which he curses, like, I wish I could someday get an opportunity to use these lines somewhere, because it's just amazing. The venom with which he curses his daughter. I'm sorry, Ian, I interrupted you with an irrelevant comment.
Oh, no, not at all. I was just was going to contrast the way King Lear used nature versus Edmund earlier, saying I thought he was referring to nature as a contrast to custom. He was calling nature like things as they really are or really ought to be, whereas custom has decided that, you know, bastard children are bad and poor, but in reality, he was referring to nature as more like reality.
They're invoking nature, the name of nature, and in doing so, I think they're trying to give themselves moral superiority or moral credit, because if, you know, custom versus nature for Edmund, you know, whose side would you really want to be on? Like, if custom is just could be wrong, but nature, you know, it's always going to be right if you're on the side of nature, particularly if nature is a goddess, you want to be on her side. So I think Edmund's invoking nature to kind of justify himself, perhaps. And so too Lear, I would say, at first pass.
I actually agree with Ian. Ian's making a great point that they are using the word nature in a different context. When Edmund says nature, he's saying that he's going to adhere to nature's law, or what is logical, rather than society's laws. So he's contrasting nature as against society's laws and customs, because according to so he's using that. Ian made this point, and I agree. While Lear, in this line that Andrew brought up, is like looking up at the heavens and saying, "Hear nature, hear me," or whatever, and then, you know, wants to bring down these curses upon his daughter in his rage. So they are using the. I think that I agree with Ian that the word nature is being used in two different contexts here, two different connotations.
Yeah, something makes me. I mean, this is assuming that I interpreted it as nature versus custom correctly the first time, but something makes me uncomfortable even about comparing these two, because Lear is not defiant of custom, at least. I mean, he's the king. I think he cares about custom and order and duty. So I did see them as using the term in a very different sense. I mean, Edmund seemed almost Rousseauian to be anachronistic.
Well, I was just wondering though, because I think it's probable that they're using them slightly differently, but both are personifying it, right? Talking about nature as a goddess. And he doesn't talk about custom is lowercase, right? And nature is uppercase, and he's proclaiming to her. So I think, yeah, there might be differences in how they're using them, but I don't know if he's just using nature as reason. He's not just saying, oh, well, like logically, I'm as good as my brother, therefore custom is irrelevant. It's not something like that. He really is, I don't know, calling her a goddess is just interesting.
But when I think what Lisa and Raj, what you're saying, and Ian is definitely right, that they're absolutely using it in different ways. I think though that when they invoke nature, I think they're just using it to justify what they want to say or do. That's all. Not that they have the same conception of what nature is and what would grant them and what is right, right? Just that they want to give themselves a higher ground, morally speaking, or in some sense, right? Maybe for their ego.
Mm-hmm.
When Edmund says, "Thou nature art my goddess, to thy law my services are bound," is this something that makes us feel positively towards him? Does it?
At
Yes,
that point,
no?
yes, because before everything else after that, I mean, after reading everything else after that, like maybe not. But at that point, yeah, because if
I
nature
just
is what customs should be based on, right? So you want to be on the side of reality. So yeah,
Well,
but
I just don't know about that. I don't think, in some way, it's true that like, oh yeah, better men should get better stuff, but this is just awfully like rule of the stronger to me, where it's like, oh well, I'm better than my brother, so I have the right to stage a plot against my father and all that, like be a liar in service of the fact that I'm better. Like it just reminds me of Raskolnikov, where it's like, I'm the better person, so I get to disobey all these nonsense rules. And it's like, well, that's not true either, right? So you might be a slightly better man, but that doesn't give you license to do any of the things that you're doing.
this is why I said, by the way,
Yeah.
everything after that point
Yeah.
is like out
Mhm.
nature. But
It's
yeah.
just a rationalization. It's just a rationalization, right? He doesn't really respect, presumably he doesn't really respect nature and its laws. He's just using it where it's convenient to him. He's using it as a justification for saying, well, I don't have to follow the laws of inheritance, and I will use my wit to get what I have been deprived of.
When I hear someone declare themselves having allegiance to nature as opposed to custom, I just hear them declaring themselves to be animals. They can say that the customs are wrong or need to, but to throw custom out altogether seems like you're just saying every animal for himself.
I think
I don't-
for just given this time and context, like if I'm hearing the bastard say to hell with custom, and therefore X, Y, and Z, not knowing what X, Y, and Z is, I'm thinking, oh, this guy is kind of seeing through the system and he's going to make a justified case for himself, at that point before X, Y, and Z, right? That's why to me, it's like, oh yeah, this might be going somewhere. Maybe Edgar is actually a bad son after all. Like I'm hoping this is going to go well, but understandably continuing, it doesn't turn out so.
I don't know if this is really relevant, and I have different line numbers than you do, which makes this unpleasant, but there's this part with when Edmund is doing his trick with Gloucester. For me, it's 104, but I think it would be later for you guys. The one that starts with
Scene two?
he talks about nature too, but it's lowercase. He says, though the wisdom of nature can reason it thus and thus, yet nature finds itself scourged by the subsequent effects. And I think that is a really different use because he's using the lowercase nature, right? So, but I was wondering if how he uses it can shed light on how maybe Edmund and Lear are using it in a way different from the kind of normal usage of it, and instead referring to her as a goddess instead of however Gloucester seems to be thinking of it here. But I don't really understand these lines very well, so I don't have more to say about it than that.
What scene was that?
This is Act 1, Scene 2. It's line 110.
Oh,
I want to read this. I think it bears on what we're talking about right now. These late eclipses in the sun and moon portend no good to us. Though the wisdom of nature can reason it thus and thus, yet nature finds itself scourged by the sequent effects. Love cools, friendship falls off, brothers divide. In cities mutinies, in countries discord, in palaces treason, and the bond cracked twixt son and father. So, what is he saying there?
Sorry, can you tell me again where those lines are?
That was on Act 1, Scene 2, line 109.
Okay.
On page 35.
It's almost It's almost like he's giving us the plot of what he's going to do. He's going to divide his father and his brother.
No, it's Gloucester speaking.
That's Gloucester.
I find it to me
I'm
that
sorry.
But Gloucester may be saying, this is what is going to
This is what's going to happen to me.
Going to happen.
Foreshadowing.
Visions are going to happen. Sorry, Nicholas.
Okay.
I just gonna say, when he says the wisdom of nature, according to, I remember it from the note, that would just meant natural philosophy. So like just astronomy, and if there's a late eclipse, you can just explain it with these natural causes. However, still, even if you could cash out nature in that scientific way, there's still a sense that nature as a moral force would still find itself more than slighted because of all these bad things that are happening. And therefore there is a sense of true right and wrong that you could perceive or understand from nature itself. That's kind of.
I think I read this differently, so let me see what people think of this. So the late eclipses in the sun and moon portend no good to us. We can reason about them, but we're still scourged by the effects. So all these bad things have been happening because of the eclipses. So the eclipses have wreaked havoc on our lives. And then Edmund, that's Gloucester, and then Edmund in the next line says, this is the excellent foppery of the world, that when we're sick in fortune, we make guilty our disasters, the sun, the moon, and the stars, as if we were villains of necessity. So, we just blame all of these natural events as condemning us with suffering, when really we're the ones responsible for it. And that's Edmund saying that.
Yeah, I interpreted it same as what you did, Lisa. That what Gloucester is saying. Is that these late eclipses in the sun and moon portend no good to us, though the wisdom of nature can reason it thus and thus. So logically, scientifically, or appropriately, we think that such and such should happen.
Eclipses happen because
the heavens just mess
they
everything up.
rotate like that.
Yeah, but so that what would be appropriate is the nature. Yet nature finds itself scourged by the sequence of, and then all these bad things happen. So even though he doesn't with the first line, I guess he does blame everything on the eclipses, and then Edmund mocks him for saying that anything that happens, we blame it on these planets and stars.
And is there a pun on eclipsing the sun? The sun's SONSUN.
Oh,
Maybe.
But this is one of the lines that I wanted to, so Edmund isn't he declaring himself completely evil? I mean, isn't he being so self-aware about that? Because he calls it an admirable evasion of whoremaster man to lay his goatish disposition on the charge of a star. So does he know he's evil and he's just seeks no justification for it outside of himself?
I think he's saying that all men are evil. All men, the whoremaster man is like the uppercase M man, meaning that all men are base. And so again, it's probably a rationalization, implied rationalization for his own behavior. That no,
I don't know.
Is it just his own behavior, or is it just the context of the time? They live in the court where we imagine that half of their life is spent scheming about who's going to get closer to the king and win his favor, who's going to take over what lands, who's going to, half of their life is spent in nefarious scheming against each other. And he's just sort of being a little bit more realistic about why this happens, rather than the credulous Gloucester who says, oh, it's, because of some animist belief that the moon controls our behavior.
Do we think that Edmund's a villain from what we've read?
Yeah.
Say Edmund's a villain, and he knows he's a villain. He embraces it. He's complete choice on his part. Do you agree with that?
He says, I should have that I am had the maidliest star in the firmament twinkled on my bastardizing. But he just
So-
seems to be completely owning his villainy.
Now,
But that's-
it's interesting that Gloucester is saying all these terrible things are happening because of eclipses.
Mhm.
And Edmund's saying that's balderdash, right? But we've actually seen, I'm not quite sure what we make of it, but from the very beginning, that very opening thing, that Edmund is what he is in some way because Gloucester went ahead, had this affair.
Mhm.
We also learned that Edmund is actually the younger son. Edgar's the older son. Edmund's the younger son. So he had this affair while he was already married to Edmund's mother, and he has fond memories of it. So Gloucester at least has something to do in his own activity with Edmund's situation, which might be part of Edmund deciding to be a villain
Mm.
because of the way he was conceived and how that worked out. I don't know what people think of that.
Yeah, they're quite close in age, aren't they? He says they're only 12 or 14 months apart, him and Edgar. And
Which
I don't know,
also
I think
cuts him out from inheritance. Edmund can't inherit, not only because he's a bastard, but also because he's the younger son.
I was just going to add, I think there's ever such a tiny touch of the anti-hero about Edmund in his clarity of thought, put it that way.
Yeah, he does. I don't see him pointing to anything outside of himself. I mean, if his father had conceived him under the Babelianist star, he'd be what he is. He seems to just, I'm a villain and that's who I am. And there's no remorse or self-doubt about that.
I guess one question would be, do we think that in fact, the fact that Edmund is a bastard would have something to do with him choosing to be a villain the way he is? But sorry, somebody else was starting to talk.
That was me, but just to answer your question, in that sense, what you're saying, Andrew, maybe not take a moment to have empathy for him, in that if you're a bastard during this time, you're kind of slighted at birth from the way you're bound to be treated by like everyone around you. And so in that sense, growing up in that environment, it's kind of horrible. Not that that justifies him, of course, but yeah.
The way I prefer to ask a question like that is, does Shakespeare direct us to have sympathy for him? Is there anything within the play that tells us we ought to have sympathy for him? And I haven't seen anything yet to suggest that. So I don't like stepping outside of it and asking that question, but within, I have not seen that, but I'm open to.
Let me ask it about Gloucester. Do we think Edmund's critique of Gloucester is right? Gloucester, you are blaming these things happening on the stars and what's going on in the heavens, but actually it's in you.
Mhm.
No.
And then it also makes me wonder, is Gloucester the kind of man who, like Goneril says of Lear, he's always had trouble knowing himself. Do we see that Gloucester doesn't know himself in some ways, and the effects of his own actions and thoughts, and he's got this thing where he's blaming it on the stars, sort of thing. Sarah?
I think I agree with Lisa that there's really nothing sympathetic about Edmund as he's portrayed in the play. I just wanted to touch on the irony here, that I feel like when we're first introduced to Edmund through Gloucester's introduction, that it seems like Gloucester's attitude toward his son is actually pretty positive. There might be room for Edmund to, I don't know, come into some inheritance or place within society, despite being a bastard, because his father is so positive toward him. But then what he actually does is become a horrible villain. And I'm guessing things are not going to end well for him. So I just thought that's very interesting. And then again, we see the irony, multiple forms of it in this scene with Gloucester and then with Edgar and Edmund. So I feel like that's, there's just so many layers here of, we know something that the characters don't know is great.
And then
That's a good point.
I wanted to make an urgent kind of comment that if we don't read some of these lines aloud, we will have lost like the joy of reading this play. And this paragraph that we are discussing right this minute was one of the ones that I enjoyed a lot when I read it aloud to myself. Thankfully, hopefully neighbors were not hearing. So I hope that we will have a couple of minutes to read one or two passages that people thought were particularly. One is, of course, like when Lear curses Goneril. That's
You're gonna read that one for us.
Top favorite, but this one is also very nice. It seems like it's not so remarkable, but when you read it aloud, it sounds really good. Just my 2 cents.
Greta,
Yeah.
you were gonna.
Yeah, I was thinking about our first introduction to Gloucester and then him blaming the stars for his problems now, because the way that I think we said this even in our first discussion, that he just seems so oblivious and kind of like inappropriate in how he talks, and he says these really vulgar things about his son's conception and things like that. And I thought that kind of goes along well with him blaming all his problems on the stars, because it's like, okay, you're saying it's because of all these eclipses. It's also because you had an affair, and now you have a son who's resentful of you for him having been born of that affair. And so it's not that what Edmund is doing isn't right, but Gloucester did bring that on himself. It's not just because of the stars. And then I thought it is also interesting about Edmund's character that he wouldn't have been an inheritor either way, right? So what he's doing, you wonder whether he would be doing what he's doing if he were legitimate. And I tend to think he wouldn't, that a lot of his resentment is because he's illegitimate. But even if he were legitimate, he wouldn't be the heir. So it's like him being illegitimate is what is pushing him to flout custom. And yet, like, even if he were legitimate, he wouldn't be getting anything anyways.
So he's
I also
flouting
think-
two customs. He's flouting the illegitimacy and the primogeniture custom of the oldest gets everything.
Yeah, though I
Well, he
also
does
think
sort
Sarah
of
made
say.
a good point.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andy.
I was gonna say, Sarah made a good point that that Gloucester is actually he's actually doing stuff to advance Edmund now and try to make him respectable. And Edmund's like, that's not, I don't want that. I want total control here or something. Yeah.
Well, he does seem to attribute part of who he is to the fact of his being a bastard, but not in a way that's ascribing blame to that. It's like ascribing pride to that. That's helped me to be who I am, or something like that. But in terms of so I just, Greta, to your point, I saw him as kind of making a general statement about human beings, that they want to attribute their villainy to the stars when really they should just take responsibility for it. But I want to note that what he says about his brother and his father in line 187 is a credulous father and a brother noble. So those are the words he uses to describe them: credulous and noble, whose nature is so far from doing harms that he suspects none, on whose foolish honesty my practice is right easy. So he's really describing them as good. And it's the fact of their goodness that makes them so vulnerable to his villainy. So I don't see him as criticizing or blaming his father for his lot at all. He just sees people as
I'm
doing.
blaming his father for his lot.
Yeah.
I don't think he is. I'm saying Gloucester thinks that he has no responsibility for the fact that he's now subject to a plot, but he did do something that put him in the situation of being subject to that kind of plot. But I don't think, I think Edmund is much more willing, but also he doesn't describe his father as noble, right? He describes his father as credulous, right?
Yes, but
his brother is noble and far from doing harm. So I think his father isn't evil or anything, but I think he's foolish, because that's even the sense I got of him in the first act too, of just like how he's speaking. He's so loose with his tongue that it's like you just kind of cringe around him, because it's like you have no sense of propriety, and that to me kind of goes along with being a little bit of a fool.
Okay, that's a good point. The father is just credulous, which fits with our first impression of him. Like that sloppiness of speech is kind of his sloppiness of character. Okay.
Shakespeare, the last two things that we have discussed, Shakespeare is using them to kind of like just make the villainy, Edmund's villainy 100%. The fact that Gloucester is trying to do some good for him just enhances Edmund's villainy. And similarly, the fact that he's taking full responsibility, not even blaming the star, that makes him like even more pure a villain. And lastly, the fact that he refers to his brother as noble, all of these things just making him, you can never get like such a pure, unadulterated villain outside of Shakespeare.
I think that's
Also, it
totally
also
true. But I also don't like Gloucester. Like not at all. I don't think what's happening to him is justified, but I don't think he's supposed to be a respectable character either. He's supposed to
Edgar seems like the victim.
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah, how
Gloucester, though, I
quickly
think-
Gloucester turns on his son, who's supposed to be so good, huh?
Yeah,
Great
that's
point.
really
Yeah.
striking that he just accepts what Edmund is setting him up to believe. He doesn't have any native trust in his son, Edgar.
Oh yeah, which fits with the term credulous. The whole effectiveness of his plot depends on his father being credulous.
So let's talk at least a little bit about Lear and Kent in the latter scenes. What do we think of Lear and how things are unfolding for him and what effect it's having on him?
Well, one of the moments that gave me a feeling of sympathy for him was he seems to be questioning now whether he is going mad and longing not to be mad. And the position of being inside your own mind, having only your own mind as your resource, and then not being able to trust your own mind just seemed like a incredibly painful place to be. So it both made him reflect for a moment that maybe he'd been unfair to Cordelia, and then just more generally start to mistrust his own mind.
Lisa, is this the line you're referring to? After the knight says, "I beseech your pardon, my lord, I'd be mistaken, for my duty cannot be silent when I think your highness wrong." So everybody's ignoring him, and he's not being taken care of by Goneril's people. And the knight is saying, "Oh," and Lear is saying, "Thou but rememberest me of mine own conception." Oh, yeah, I think I got that. I think you're right. "I have perceived a most faint neglect of late, which I have rather blamed as mine own jealous curiosity, than as a very pretense and purpose of unkindness." So, which I have rather blamed as mine own jealous curiosity.
Sorry, where is this, Luke?
Okay, yeah, sorry, I didn't mention that. That's line 67.
Which
And
Act 1, scene 4.
okay.
yeah. So
It's page 47 in this one.
Okay.
so that was the first moment of like self-awareness. You know what? Maybe I thought I was noticing that they were being mean to me, but I was just attributing that to me kind of, and I've got a note here, oversensitivity for mine own jealous curiosity. So that was the first time I said, wow, okay, he has some awareness that perhaps like all this stuff that's happens around him, Kent and Cordelia, that he does maybe sense that he might be a little bit too harsh. So that what you were saying, Lisa.
There's another line. It's 270, line 275 around. And Lear says to Goneril, "Detested kite, thou liest. My train are men of choice and rarest parts, that all particulars of duty know, and in the most exact regard support the worships of their name. O most small fault, how ugly didst thou in Cordelia show, which like an engine wrenched my frame of nature from the fixed place, drew from my heart all love, and added to the gall." So wasn't he saying there that the fault in her was small?
He's admitting it.
The line right at the end, right? That's the clearest point where he says, "Let me not be mad, sweet heaven, keep me in a temper."
Well,
Okay.
that's the part about the madness, but I'm saying what made him feel like he was unfair to Cordelia.
Oh, I see. I see.
And then that's the line where it seemed like that crack in wondering whether he had been unfair to Cordelia seemed to open up to him the possibility that he is losing his own faculties.
I want to read that whole bit. Almost small fault. How ugly didst thou in Cordelia show, which like an engine wrenched my frame of nature from the fixed place, drew from my heart all love and added to the gall. O Lear, 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 beat at this gate that let thy folly in and thy dear judgment out.
Yeah.
Oh, Lear, 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 beat at this gate.
Yeah.
Right, that's what that's the gate he's beating at. Beat at this gate that let thy folly in and thy dear judgment out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to use this at a dinner party.
Can you take a video of it? I want to see. But
But
yeah, it is
that was
remarkable
a scene that's so
how-
painful to witness. Somebody who just starts to mistrust that he can tell right from wrong, or yeah.
He's breaking
I
down.
think we must suspend our context to see the joy of this play and the emotional power of this play. We must suspend our context of like thinking whether it makes sense that the person does this, or whether this is a good thing to do or a bad thing to do, etc. But like I felt that when I was reading it aloud, like I was able to get into the characters a little bit to some extent and kind of feel it more strongly. And I wasn't trying to evaluate them using my own context.
Were you bring this up as a criticism, Lisa?
Yeah,
context are you talking about?
What context are you I'm not sure what the context for that comment was.
Like, for example, like, a lot of the things that Edmund says are beautifully written. Yeah, sure, he's a villain and absolute, and like, there's no doubt about it. Like, nobody is questioning that he's an unadulterated villain. But if you read like a lot of the lines that have been given to him and the ideas, he has this beautiful idea that people who are born bastards are actually in a way better because they are born out of passion and lust rather than out of this half asleep kind of lovemaking. And if I focus on the fact that Edmund is a bad guy, I would lose that. And similarly, he has this beautiful passage. I don't know how the Shakespearean audiences must have felt about it, but where he says that we blame everything on the stars and the moons. There's like a whole long passage about that is beautifully written and reads very.
I'm not sure what you're meaning by beauty, but I don't see those things as at odds with each other. If we have to keep focused on the intention of it and what it means about the character, however compellingly written it is, we can be conscious of how compellingly written and beautiful the language or the expression is and still retain the meaning for that character. Otherwise, we're losing the overall impact of the play and just sort of turning it into poetic fragments. So I want to be cautious not to look at them kind of in isolation from the whole of the play so that we don't lose the intention of the.
My point was that your point is that.
Yeah,
go ahead, Andrew.
Can you just tell us why you brought this up again?
Well,
at least you brought up
something that we were talking.
He's asking me, Rush, why I brought up what?
Why you brought up Lear's madness or becoming self-aware. It seemed like that was the point you were making. What were you saying?
Well, a part of I think I was feeling empathy for Lear in that situation. Now we can judge Lear for his treatment of Cordelia and for his inability to see how false his other daughters are being and for his rashness with Kent. But there's something, I think part of what I've come to appreciate about this play and suspect I might come to appreciate about Shakespeare generally is bringing out these kind of fundamental human experiences and doing it in such an epic way. I appreciated your point about picturing how this is staged, because in my mind, this is staged epically. Like everything has to be huge and larger than life. And that's part of it's almost like the Greek myths effect, that it's taking something about life and human nature and unapologetically dramatizing it right to its core. So anyway, the descent of an aged person into some kind of madness or mistrust of his own mind seems like a tragic and painful and universal sort of experience to present to us. So I guess that's the...
So then we've seen a couple of those instances here already, that first he's mistrusting himself when he says, yeah, you know, they were treating me not as well as they ought to, but I didn't believe it. So I guess I was wrong about that. And then here it was, oh my goodness, look what I did to Cordelia.
Mm-hmm.
And that, how wrong that he's starting to see how wrong that was.
Mm-hmm.
And then Greta brought up the line later on. It's like, he's feeling like he's going mad. He's losing control of his mental faculties.
Mm-hmm.
And that ought to evoke sympathy, or it does for you.
Yes. And in contrast to the attitude that Goneril takes when she's saying, oh, we've seen him have these tendencies all along, and now they're just getting worse, it almost makes their obligation to him greater, and it makes their obligation to him harder, that they have to figure out how to take care of him and do right by him, given that it's difficult to reason with him. So that the intensity of that moral situation is what really strikes me in this first act.
Yeah, and I thought, like, I get the sense that, like, his curse that he puts on Goneril, like, if he were told that he had said that in one of his more sober moments, I think he would be appalled. Like, that is the most horrific thing to say to your child. And I just imagine that if he had heard that either when he was a little more sane, or even just in one of his calmer moments, he'd be really disgusted and appalled with himself that he had said that.
Mm-hmm.
I think Luke, almost small fault. I think he's referring to Cordelia's.
Yeah.
That Cordelia's fault was so small, and yet it seemed so ugly and huge to me at the time.
Yeah.
It feels like he's presented at many stages with having a tenuous grip on reality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the whole setup at the beginning is preposterous, that he's dividing up his kingdom 3 ways just on the statement of who loves each other. So right from the start, he's presented in a preposterous circumstance. And as the time goes on, he's taking his cues from people that he seems to have just met. Like Kent shows up dressed as Caius, a complete stranger, and he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm a man." And like 2 lines later, he's like taking him as one of his dearest counsels and saying, "Follow me. I'm gonna pay attention to what you tell me." And then the same thing happens with
Sending
a knight
him as a
later
messenger
on.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, the same thing happens with
also,
the knight later on, where the knight says something and he's like, "Oh yeah, no, that's a good point." And he's just completely, not sure of himself, and it's crumbling, and it's really sad to see. And the epic tragedy is that his daughters, through their avarice, all they can see is the kingdoms and the money, and not the fact that their should-be beloved father is crumbling before their eyes.
Right.
We don't have time to talk about the fool, but this is like an iconic fool among Shakespeare's fools. And it seems like one thing you notice about the fool is the fool sees how stupid Lear was, how stupid and wrong he was, and how I guess stupid it was for him to say, "I'm going to give up everything, but I'm going to retain all of respect and all the things that are personally good for me. I'm going to retain that." Anybody would know that, even the fool does. So that does show you how it highlights how self-deceived and clueless Lear was in making this decision.
But I wonder if deep down Lear knows the fool's right, because he lets him say such impertinent things to the king that other people wouldn't get away with, because I just think maybe deep down he feels that he's right.
Oh my gosh. One of the best lines from the fool was that he gets beaten for telling the truth. He gets beaten for lying. He gets beaten for not saying anything. And he'd still rather be himself than Lear. I'm pretty sure that
That's-
was the meaning of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
Ian-
shall we wrap it up?
One quick thing, I can't remember if Greta said this last session or in our powwow afterwards, which we always have, but she said something like, well, this Lear shows us why we have to have our minds in good order before we get old. So that those patterns that get, and then the fool said, thou shouldst not have been old till thou hadst been wise.
Exactly.
That's his advice. You shouldn't have gotten old before you got wise.
And I think that's a really interesting thing, especially as you think about it with knowing people who get old and anticipating getting old ourselves, that if you've not attained some kind of wisdom when you were capable, your older life can just fall apart. It just can be terrible. So.
Yeah.
I love how densely packed this is.
Mhm.
It's not that much reading that we've done, and yet there's so many threads of drama, and I'm just excited to see what happens next.
And more to come. Yeah.
So what's our next assignment?
Just read Act 2.
Act 2?
Yep.
I'm also going to put a link in the chat for a new email list. Lisa and Kyle Steele, who's head of school at VanDamme Academy, are going to be doing a discussion of Chaim Gnat's, which one, Between Parent and Child. So it's and if you want to get information about that, we'll be sending more info through the email list, but I'm putting the email list in the chat if you want to sign up for it so that you can receive information about that.
That one's going to be a little different, and it's going to be a course for which we'll charge a fee, but we're planning a 6-week discussion of Between Parent and Child, which we consider, Kyle and I consider, one of the most formative influences on us as parents, as educators, and as people. Whereas we're as conscious of the influence when we're talking to each other as we are when we're talking to our students or our kids.
Sometimes when I was upset, I would be talking to my mom and she would say something and I would just go, don't Chaim Gnat me.
And
But
for anyone watching,
even when you said that, it was still working. You'd say it with a calm smile.
and for anyone watching this as a recording, I will put this link in the YouTube description.
Okay. All right, I could continue for a couple more hours, but we'll call it to
next week.
an end there, and we'll see everyone next week.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great
Thank you.
discussion. Bye, everybody.